Hey, it's Jordan with TYT Network. We're here in Columbia, South Carolina. I have the state capitol in the back. As you know, that was the epicenter of a lot of history the last few months. The Confederate flag coming down. I'm here with Carlton, who's a local resident here, and you actually live a couple blocks from here.
I do. I live not too far from here. I moved here in 1998, been here ever since.
Tell me about what you've seen over the last few months, what your involvement was.
Actually, over the last few months, when we saw the Confederate flag come down, that's something that people have been protesting and advocating to do for a long period of time. Quite honestly, of course, with the Emanuel 9 massacre, sad that we had to, sacrifice or have some people lose their lives for, something like that to happen. But when it came down, I actually, of course, there was a whole voting process that was involved. I stayed in the State House until probably 1 o'clock that morning, after 1 that morning, until the final vote came in. A few days later, I came down to see it lowered and taken down.
You talk about it's sad that it took 9 African Americans getting shot down. Do you guys resent that it seems like it was a bit more of a political move to take down this symbol of racism, murder? What are your thoughts on what prompted it to come down?
Well, we're happy that it came down. We hate the fact that people had to lose lives for it to come down when we've been saying that it needed to come down for years and years and years, but it fell on deaf ears.
That's unacceptable. We don't know if this shooting was racially motivated.
It was!
Of course, David Beasley, former Governor David Beasley, made an attempt to compromise and bring it down, and we appreciate those efforts. However, for it to come down all the way, there was still a fight to bring it down, even after the Emanuel 9 massacre. We have people who defended the flag, just saying it was a fabric of the people of South Carolina, in which that may be true, but we do not want that to represent the entire state of South Carolina.
Blacks would not be here if people had to vote slaves back in the day.
Talk to me about the candidates. It's odd because you look at Hillary Clinton versus Bernie Sanders, and just on its face, on policies, many would argue that Bernie Sanders' policies of $15 minimum wage, public college tuition being free, single payer.
We are going to create an economy that works for working families, not just the billionaire class.
What he's proposing would disproportionately help African Americans, but it seems by the numbers that the bulk of African Americans support Hillary Clinton. I've met some of those during my reporting here, and you get things like "We love Bill Clinton" or she's experienced. But what do you think that disconnect is? Because I would think, I'm not African American, but that Bernie's message would appeal.
Bernie Sanders is the only candidate on either side who has come out and actually spoken to issues that directly affect African Americans, that have affected African Americans for years. Even when it was unpopular, even early on in his candidacy, it was a very super high risk for him to call the names out of people who have fallen as a result of police brutality or lost their lives, to the same thing. But
tell me about that risk. What was he risking by doing that?
Is it very unpopular? It's very unpopular. When you start talking about police brutality, is such a taboo subject that a lot of people don't want to necessarily touch.
For too many years, too many mostly black suspects have been treated terribly and in some cases murdered. That is unacceptable. And police officers have got to be held accountable for their actions.
I mean, we all love police officers. We all know that they're...
They give me a hell of a lot of tickets.
Oh, goodness. Hey, me as well. In which we understand that it's necessary that they're incorporated into our government. So basically, when Bernie Sanders took that step to say, we need to address police brutality, he took that risk of a lot of people turning their backs on him. He took that risk of a lot of people not endorsing him, so to speak. And in my opinion, that just speaks volumes when it comes to being courageous and being bold.
54 years ago, you were in the front lines of trying to desegregate school housing at the University of Chicago. You were even arrested.
Injustice is something that I have always fought throughout my life.
When I'm in Iowa or New Hampshire at Bernie Sanders events, it's predominantly white, because those states are predominantly white. And the main issue for them is the banks, the crony capitalism, and public financing. Do you and other people is that a hot button issue for you? The Wall Street greed, the concentration of wealth. Do you hear that in conversations with people, that that's an issue to you and people you know?
A lot of people I know is not necessarily so much of an issue because we're so far removed and living from paycheck to paycheck that we don't even have a chance to invest in stock markets, 401ks. So the Wall Street is so far removed. I mean, even when you talk about Wall Street and Main Street, you're talking about rural South Carolina. Main Street is still so far away from dirt roads and people who still need to have some type of 401k or retirement plans. But as I said, they're living paycheck to paycheck. And since inflation has gone up way back in 2007, African Americans still haven't recovered from that recession. We're not even thinking about Wall Street.
I did an interview yesterday at a barber shop. I don't know if you like my hair. They actually cut my hair. I interviewed them, and one of them said the problem is a majority of African Americans don't do their research.
Yeah, I would have to agree. Of course, I would say either side, Republican, Democrat, black, white, any race, you always have a group of people who are not going to do their homework, and it just comes down to popularity. Who are you voting for? Who are you voting for? And then they gravitate towards the most popular candidate.
Yeah, I met a girl. One of them said, I love Hillary. And when I pointed out, what about, Bill putting a lot of African Americans in jail? She said, he did do that. So it seems to be kind of like we love Hillary and Bill, but, those two things clash.
Understood. Well, Bill Clinton has been, in the African American community, been kind of adopted as the first African American or the first black president. And people feel comfortable with the Clintons. I always love Bill Clinton. I can't, deny that. I've loved the Clinton brand. So I've done my research as well. One thing that changes things for me is that a lot of what I'm hearing Senator Sanders say is echoed by Hillary Clinton. So that's where I've done a lot of.
Later on, though, after the fact.
After the fact, which is a good point. I'm glad you reiterated that part.
In fairness to Secretary Clinton, one of her opening speeches was actually about mass incarceration, which is kind of interesting since her husband is kind of responsible for a lot of that. But, trying to talk about that is a big problem. But, when I look at it, the bulk of the congressmen, senators, in history, presidents have been old, rich white dudes who still see marijuana, who still see crack cocaine. I'm not saying cocaine and all of these is good, but as things that instead of rehabilitation is punishment. So what is the road forward that you actually trust? Will they start releasing people? Will they start helping those people while in jail develop the skills for jobs after? Because it's either side, Bernie, Hillary. It's great rhetoric, but I would think that if you release a good half of these people, you could have a lot more economic productivity.
I agree. If being released, you would have a lot of economic productivity. This is the downside. When a lot of people get released from prison, they don't have a chance to actually get any type of employment that would help them sustain a decent living that would allow them to take care of their families, because they have to check a box that says they are a convicted felon, which gets their application thrown in the trash, immediately in several cases.
It's hard for me as a white guy who never got in trouble, never got arrested. It's hard for me to get a good job because you got a lot of people applying, so I could only imagine for someone in jail.
Oh, absolutely, and I'm sure that stigma and that prejudice is already there. So if someone went to jail, we have to give them some type of skills while they're in jail, or else we're setting them up for failure when we just go ahead and release them. Or else when they're released, at least have a program in place for them to actually learn a trade, learn a few skills, learn something, and then come back and be that productive person in society that we know that they can be.
Talking about the barbershop I was at, and some other people I spoke to, I kind of get a little vibe of a lot of cynicism in the African American community, a lot of mistrust, and kind of they're all full of shit, And I think a lot of that's because of oppression for centuries, Do you see among African American friends, family, what have you, kind of a belief Bernie, Hillary, all these we'll just pick the best of the worst?
Unfortunately, that's what happens in a lot of cases. We do not have a lot of options that are actually on the ballot. One thing that struck me about Senator Sanders was the whole election process. I've had family members who've run for several offices, and in order to get into these offices, it takes a lot of signatures you have to put on ballots. It takes a lot of money to get where you are. I believe that sometimes you can actually look at your next door neighbor or look at the guy down the street, could be a business owner, who is very talented and who could actually be that guy to be the president or be a senator or be an elected official and serve in the same capacity and sometimes do a better job. They just don't have the opportunities. And quite honestly, in answering your question, we have to change that entire process in order to give more people a fair chance rather than get folks who can get into a place because they're privileged or they have money or some type of entitlement. And once they get in there, they just keep that office and they don't do anything for anybody other than their friends who actually endorse them or give them huge contributions in which their companies, their factories, or any type of businesses basically get the kickbacks. And
Going back to the old school African-American activists versus younger school, I would think, and hey, I don't want to sound like I don't know what I'm talking about because I'm a white guy and I don't know, I've never dealt with these issues firsthand, but I would think Martin Luther King, Bernie Sanders is not Martin Luther King, but that message of like, let's dream big, let's do this thing would really resonate with African Americans. And right now it's not, at least in South Carolina. So is there just, there's been kind of an evolution of the African American people to pragmatism rather than that idealism?
I think what it is, we're all about survival. Since beginning of times, and when I say beginning of times, since we came to this country, it was all about survival. Even down to the food that we still eat until this day. You know, we call it soul food, but that was basically scraps that were given to slaves in which we adopted as a part of our culture. And then we became proud of that. There were, certain prejudices and the things that made us stand out that we were taught to, that we should feel ashamed about, but we adopted that in order to make ourselves feel proud and empower ourselves. Even until this day, it just bleeds over and spills over into the next generation, to the next generation, to the next generation. So when it comes down to survival, we're just trying to survive. However, the election of President Obama gave us more hope. I know some people say, oh, hope, that's all hope is, but you have to have hope in order to have a dream. Once you have that dream, it's up to you to nurture it and then move forward. So actually Bernie Sanders and everything that he's speaking of right now, he just gives us hope to actually move on, to just say, hey, at least there's hope. As long as we have hope and we can hold on to it and pull ourselves up, we can move forward and actually make things happen.
No president can do what has to be done unless millions of Americans come together and say loudly and clearly, enough is enough.
Last question. When can I expect to cover your senatorial run here?
Hey, that's actually a good question. I have a brother who's in Alabama, if you want to look him up. His name is Will Boyd, Dr. Will Boyd. He's running right now, so as soon as we get his out the way, maybe I'll follow in a few years down the line.
You speak well.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.